YouTube, Facebook, Mgtow, what's going on? Reading this book called it's Ayn Rand for the New Intellectuals. Truly just an unbelievably insightful book. Just read the first part of it and wanted to share just a few things. So Ayn Rand is a philosopher. She's written a lot on morality. She's an advocate of capitalism. She's also an advocate of free markets. She's an advocate of rational self-interest. And this book, at least, was written in 1961, but the ideas in it are still really relevant to today. And they have a lot to do. It's really interesting how I'm reading this and I'm like, this is a woman philosopher, but she speaks in a way that is so contrary to not only women of her time, but of feminists of this time. So I thought that was really interesting. But she says there's two principles. One principle is epistemological, which means it's knowledge-based. The other is moral. And they're not axioms, but she says until a man has proved them to himself and has accepted them, he is not fit for an intellectual discussion. So she says the two principles are that emotions are not tools of cognition. And I made videos on this on my Facebook channel about how the constant internal battle of humanity is between a person's feelings or emotions and their rationality of any situation. So she says that one must differentiate between one's thoughts and one's emotions with clarity and precision. One does not have to be omniscient in order to possess knowledge. One merely has to know that which one does know, and distinguish it from which one feels. Nor does one need a full system of philosophical epistemology in order to distinguish one's own considered judgment from one's feelings, wishes, hopes, or fears. Those who claim that they cannot do it are merely confessing that they have never learned how to use their minds. So she's saying that people who have not learned how to differentiate between their thoughts and their feelings have not learned how to use their minds. She says it becomes intellectual fraud when such persons enter a philosophical discussion and demand consideration for their ideas. No discussion, cooperation, agreement, or understanding is possible among men who substitute emotion for proof. It's really interesting because this is a woman speaking as well. And it's funny because she's, again, back in 1961, she's talking about something that is so dear to my heart because it's something that I've really been talking about a lot in my life. And I just so happened to pick up this book at the bookstore and I'm reading it and wow, it's like, oh my God, like I'm hearing myself speak. If you look at what cognitive dissonance really is, it's a disconnect between the conscious and the subconscious mind. So the conscious mind is rational, dealing with facts, the here and now, and the subconscious mind is dealing with a lot of emotions that were triggered by certain stimuli, and that get re-triggered with stimuli that the brain processes as similar stimuli. So, like when people say, why is this girl staying in this abusive relationship with this man, or why is this man staying in this abusive relationship with this woman? A lot of times, these are issues of people listening to their emotions rather than dealing with the fact at hand. That's just one example. And that plagues a lot of people. And a definite sign of maturity is somebody who understands discernment, who discerns between an emotional, and I'm going to say desire is a big pull that can get a lot of people, the desire for something which is triggered by emotions versus like the practicality of the situation at hand. she also talks, so she says the other thing is that the second principle represents one's basic rejection to claim the right to initiate the use of physical force against another man. The right to compel his agreement by the threat of physical destruction is to evict oneself automatically from the realm of rights, of morality, and of the intellect. Perhaps the most obscene legacy of altruism among modern intellectuals is their axiomatic acceptance of brute force and of somebody's sacrifice as a normal and necessary part of a human society, and their refusal to consider the possibility of a non-sacrificial, non-compulsory coexistence and cooperation amongst men. And she talks about this in a lot of philosophers' support of socialism, and how a lot of socialist leaders have compelled people to not act in their own best interest and to treat people's talents as a resource for society, as opposed to allowing men to be free moral agents and to decide for themselves what they want to do. So she says, to wrap this up, she says also, a second, looking at this. They cannot conceive of selfishness except in terms of sacrificing others to oneself, and they cannot conceive of anyone who does not regard such sacrificing as to his own interest. This, of course, is a psychological confession about the nature of their own desires and about the tyrant in their souls. When they declare that they see no difference between economic power and political power, which means no difference between an employer and a hold-up man, no difference between the United States and the Soviet Russia, they are confessing a witch doctor's abject fear of reality, which makes them equate a producer with a tyrant. One would suppose that any man who makes claim to the title of moralist, humanitarian, or intellectual would spend his life trying to devise as an ideal a social system where no man or group of men may initiate the use of physical force against others or demand the sacrifice of anyone to anyone. But when one remembers that such a system was devised and did exist... Okay, never mind. So yeah, she's saying that no man may use force against another man. So no compulsory actions taken to subdue other men. So Ayn Rand is very much a free market person. She's against government in many ways. She says that all the economical tyrannical acts have been not done by capitalism, but by government control and government regulations. And she believes that socialism is an idea that's meant to compel people to sacrifice what they have produced for the greater good, but that it's a compulsory sacrifice, not one that's done by free will or by one's own volition. So that's all I got for you guys. Ayn Rand for the New Intellectual, great book. Pick it up, read it. It's awesome.